This is Business Week, and here's what's coming up in the moment. The Central Bank of Nigeria has suspended the reintroduction of processing fees on cash deposits of over 500,000 naira for individual accounts and more than 3 million naira for corporate accounts until September 30, 2024. Plus, the Corporate Affairs Commission has inaugurated a center for bulk registration of POS operators in its database. And outside Nigeria, TikTok has sued the U.S. government in a federal appeal court in Washington, D.C. in a bid to block a new law that will force the China-based parent company to sell the popular video sharing app. This and many more are what to expect on the show today. I am Frank Omalabe. Business Week starts in a moment. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Let's get started right away with some of the major stories that made headlines in the week. The Central Bank of Nigeria has suspended the reintroduction of processing fees and cash deposit of over 500,000 naira for individual accounts and more than 3 million naira for corporate accounts until September 30, 2024. The nation's Apex Bank said in a circular signed by the Director of Banking Supervision, Mr. Adetono Adedeji, bank customers of money deposit banks raised concern that the banks have begun collection of processing fees for cash deposit as of May 1, as contained in an email sent to the customer. According to the circular for the APS Bank, from the APS Bank, financial institutions and non-financial institutions, in it said the processing fees have been suspended and extend the suspension of the processing fees of 2% and 3% previously charged on all cash deposit above these thresholds until September 30, 2024. This Apex Bank directs a financial institution to continue to accept all cash deposit from the public without any charges till the end of the third quarter. Away from there now, the Corporate Affairs Commission says it is committed to formalizing businesses nationwide as it seeks to enhance accountability and integrity among business proprietors. The Director General emphasized this during a press briefing where he emphasized the importance of small business owners, including POS operators, registering with the Commission. Uloma Onyimachi reports.
The launch of the Secretariat for Active Registration of FinTech Operators, commonly referred to as POS operators, has taken place. This 24-hour secretariat is poised to serve as a hub for entrepreneurs seeking registration with the Corporate Affairs Commission, enabling them to enhance their reliability and accountability to customers.
And to show our seriousness and a commitment, that is where we have dedicated a special secretariat to accommodate this registration. We are aware that this very secretariat now is full with my staff that those saddled with the responsibility of availability, and some are being saddled with the responsibility of being approving officers to any request. We have trained our staff that can accommodate this activity, and this staff, they have the capacity to work from home. That's why we say 24-hour service. The normal working hours close by 4, but because we have equipped them with facilities, we believe they can work from home for approval and availability sake.
The Director General emphasized that this mandate aligns with the Corporate Affairs Commission's laws, further legitimizing businesses.
CAC on our part, we are enforcing the provisions of the law. It is the law make it mandatory for any person to carry out any business in Nigeria, in the country, your business must be legitimate. CAC is like we are hosting a data, the country data. If any crime happen in any place now, the security agents, the first place to call is CAC. They will ask you, who are the people behind this company? Who are the people behind this fraud now? But POS that are not registered, you imagine that if any incident happen now, when they refer to CAC, and we look at this, the operator of that POS, if we don't have his data, we can't respond.
The Director General reviewed the registration application with additional inquiries made to ensure clarity and understanding of its purpose.
Elsewhere in the week, the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited says motorists should shun panic buying of the product as the nationwide supply and distribution of the product continue to improve across the country. The company Chief Corporate Communications Officer, Mr. Olufemi Shonaye, made this known in a statement while emphasizing that NNPC Limited has over 1.5 billion liters stock of premium motor spirit to last for over 30 days. The communications officer said NNPC Limited is collaborating with relevant agencies such as the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, labor unions in the sector, and security operatives to address hoarding and other unwholesome practices across the country. And away from there, the Nigerian government has assured oil and gas investors of its commitment to eliminate challenges hindering the smooth operations of businesses in the country. The Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Oil, Senator Heineken Lokobiri, gave the assurance during the opening section of the Nigerian pavilion at the Offshore Technology Conference in Houston, United States of America. The minister in his comment assured investors that crude oil would remain relevant for a long time and that the federal government is creating an enabling environment that will attract the best of investment in the country for safe return on their investment. Also, the week, the Nigerian Shippers Council is taking decisive action to ensure smooth export from the nation's ports with a focus on the speedy evacuation of goods. The council, as the port economic regulator, is engaging with port operators to address challenges hindering cargo evacuation. TVC News senior business correspondent Ifunanya Eze has more.
Recognizing the importance of Nigeria's maritime industry, the Nigerian Shippers Council is actively working to overcome obstacles to efficient cargo movement at the port. Executive Secretary Mr. Pius Akuta and his team recently met with APM terminals in Apapa to discuss expediting cargo evacuation, particularly for perishable exports. During the meeting, Mr. Akuta emphasized the need for better communication with shippers to avoid terminal congestion.
We need to see that shippers are doing well, and if at the end of the day they're not able to achieve the result, then it's even harming the economy. Not just that what their contribution into the economy should be is not achieved, but also that they have taken loans that may end up becoming bad loans.
APM Terminal Manager Mr. Steen Knudsen acknowledged existing export standards, but highlighted the need for stricter adherence to facilitate quicker evacuation.
There is a process with customs to evacuate the containers and then auction them out. So, but to my knowledge, there's no real laid down process for export containers, because it's been a growing market, right? So the problem has only become real in the last 12, 18 months or so. So that is also one where we need to, with the industry and with the regulators, to work together. What is actually the evacuation or the retrieval process of these long-standing, so we can evacuate them from the seaports again.
We are here to ensure that we have a process that is seamless, that supports what we are doing, because whatever engagement we have, at the end of the day, if we're not able to achieve the export, then we're doing nothing. We're doing nothing. So that's why we're here, and we want to work together with the shipping lines, with the terminal operators, with the shippers themselves, and all other agencies, other stakeholders, to ensure that what we're doing is yielding results and is adding up to the economy.
Looking ahead, the Council plans to convene a stakeholders meeting to find lasting solutions to cargo evacuation challenges at the port.
And outside Nigeria now, in a bid to block a new law that will force the China-based parent company to sell the popular video sharing app within the next year or face a total ban in the U.S., TikTok has sued the federal government in a federal appeal court in Washington, D.C. The lawsuit seeks a court order to block the implementation of the bipartisan legislation which President Biden signed into law last month after it rapidly progressed through Congress. TikTok says the laws doubt the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversaries Control Applications Act is unconstitutional and that divestiture within a 12-month timeline is simply not possible, as this will silence 170 million Americans who use the platform to communicate in ways that cannot be replicated elsewhere. TikTok asked the court to find that the law violates the U.S. Constitution as well as to grant any further relief that may be appropriate. Well, those were some of the biggest stories of the week. And coming up in a moment after this break, our focus is on the CBN's Cybersecurity Act 2024 as amended and its impact on the economy. Well, that's our talking point in a moment. Please stay with us. You're also watching the Business Week coming to you from our studios here in Lagos. Well, let's get into our conversation now. The Central Bank of Nigeria on Monday issued a directive for banks and other financial institutions to start deducting a cybersecurity levy set at 0.5% of the value of all electronic transactions following an introduction of the newly enacted 2024 Cybercrime Amendment Act intended to fund national cybersecurity fight. However, some Nigerians are wondering whether the rate to be deducted is 0.005% or 0.5%. Well, let's get some understanding of these and what this means for the economy. I'm joined by the CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you for your time, Dr. Muda, for joining us. The introduction of the new 0.5% cybersecurity levy by the CBN seems to have created confusion among Nigerians. The confusion stems from a repealed law of the Cybercrimes Prohibition and Prevention Act of 2015 and 2018 by the CBN circular, then, of course, which was much more lower than this one. But some of them are unsure whether the correct rate is 0.005% or 0.5%. Help us make sense of this. What's your understanding of this levy?
The cybercrime levy, I think, was intended to raise revenue for purposes of tackling the challenges of cybercrime, especially at the level of state security. Of course, many agencies of government have been complaining about inadequate funding and all of that. So perhaps this is the thinking of the National Security Advisor and all those within that space of how best to raise revenue. And that is why I think they have proposed this levy. And from what we are beginning to hear now, this legislation has been there at least since 2015 or thereabout. So what we're experiencing now is just a review, an amendment of that legislation which was done in 2024. So I think it is that amendment that has moved the rate now up to 0.5%. But just as you said, there is now confusion. Mr. Bayo Onanuga has been saying about what the rate is, that the rate is 0.005%. But what is clearly stated in the CBN circular is 0.5%. So I think within government, they need to even tidy this up to know exactly what we are dealing with. So to answer your question directly, this is just about raising revenue. Or whether this is the best way to do it, I think, and whether this is the best timing, I think that is what is a subject of a lot of debates and even sometimes a lot of outrage coming from the citizens and from the business community.
Well, there are about 16 types of transactions, exempted from this policy. However, there are reactions and calls for, from Nigerians to suspend the policy. What do you suppose are the implications of this on businesses, consumers, and the overall Nigerian economy? And talking about whether this is the right time to introduce such policy or not, should this be a point of conversation since the CBN is making room for exemptions?
Well, there are issues about timing, and there are issues about, whether this is equitable or whether this can be rationalized or justified. And there are also constitutional issues that have been raised as a result of this. Now, already, we are at a time when the citizens are complaining very bitterly. They are bothered about the cost of living. Inflation now, headline inflation is around 33%. food inflation is 40%. Both the citizens and the stakeholders in the business environment are yet to fully recover from the shocks of the current economic reforms. This is not to diminish the importance of the reforms, but we need to relate to the reality of the outcomes of the reforms, which, of course, is biting very hard on the citizens. Beyond that, the citizens and businesses are already paying a whole lot of taxes. And based on that, we got an assurance from government that these taxes were going to be streamlined, were going to be reduced. Taxation on the citizens will be reduced, which was why the president set up the Presidential Committee on Fiscal and Tax Reforms. And that committee, headed by Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, has repeatedly given us assurance that the mandate they had from the government was to streamline these taxes, that you have too many taxes. So if on one hand, we have a presidential committee that is trying to prune down the number of taxes, and on the other hand, we are having new tax being imposed, then something is not adding up internally within the governance space. And I think we need to do a lot more around that. I need to ensure proper coordination and consultation within government. But having said that, companies are already paying company tax. We have value-added tax. We have stamp duty. We have tertiary education tax. We have police trust fund tax. We have the tertiary health institution tax. This is just at the federal level. In addition to this, we have many regulatory agencies imposing one form of levy, taxes, fees on the business community. Then businesses and citizens are also grappling with taxes from the state governments, state government institutions, and all these are micro enterprises, and the rest are also grappling with the challenges of taxes from local government institutions. These are issues around the multiplicity of taxes that we are trying to deal with. So that is why it is a major concern to the business community and to the citizens. When you look at the number of taxes that you already are grappling with, and we look at, even the impact of that on the citizen, because this tax that is being proposed now is an equivalent of between 3 to 4 trillion in value. When you look at how much will be extracted both from the citizens and from businesses.
Well, the circular clearly stated that, when it was released on Monday, that implementations is in 2 weeks from the announcement date. However, the House of Rep has called for a hold on the implementation. You mentioned earlier that the value of this levy is about 4 trillion naira. How should these funds be deployed for effective use should the CBN proceed with implementation? I understand the Office of the National Security Advisor has been saddled with the responsibility of the management of this fund.
No, what is before us is a fund that will be managed by the Office of the National Security Advisor. And when it comes to security matters, there's a lot of discretionary issues. Discretionary spending, very minimum disclosure. We had an experience with the Office of the National Security Advisor under the regime of Jonathan. What Dasuki went through, after that regime, because there are so much fund over which he has so much discretion. And this creates a whole lot of corruption risk. So what I think should happen, the CBN is implementing a legislation. The CBN is not the author of this. The National Assembly is the author of this. And happily, I heard from the same National Assembly just today that they have resolved, I think the House of Reps have passed a motion that this levy should be suspended. We are yet to hear from the Senate. But because they are representatives of the people, I think their disposition should reflect the feelings of the people. And it's also a sad commentary that while this was going on, there was no proper sensitization to invite citizens' engagement. For public hearing, I'm not sure we had any exposure draft, so that people can be properly engaged, because that is the value of democracy.
Well, Dr. Muda, just before I let you go, let's look at the banking sector and the security applications and systems around financial firms. How fundamentally secured are the banks?
No, our banking sector is very strong. In fact, I would say we have the best banking sector in Africa. And many of our banking institutions can compete globally with many of the banks and even in the advanced economies. Because the level of technology application in our banking system is superb. The electronic payment system is great. Industry statistics as at 2022 showed that we had an electronic payment system to the value of 1,550 trillion naira. That's 1.55 quadrillion. It's a lot. So when it comes to, electronic payment system, it's also a reflection on how far our banking system had gone. And if you look at the critical ratios that you use to measure the stability of a bank, like the capital adequacy ratio, non-performing loan ratio, liquidity ratio, our banking system is great. I mean, for a long time, we haven't had any major bank failure in this country. So they are doing a lot. And I know that they are investing a lot in technology, including cybersecurity. There are manner of softwares that they are using because they also appreciate the risk to their businesses of cyber insecurity. So there's a lot of investment that has gone into that space. So as far as the private sector is concerned, I think there have been significant investments in that space. I don't think we need to worry so much. What we need to worry about is the negative impact on the electronic payment culture that you're already nurturing and growing. That is likely to be challenged by this cybersecurity levy. So that is why I think that we need to go back to the drawing board and look at this whole policy again. Let that play out even more when we are talking about this kind of policies or legislation.
Well, I think a good place to leave the conversation. CEO Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, Dr. Muda Yusuf, thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you.
Well, interesting conversation there. You've been watching Business Week. Just before we draw the curtain on this episode, let's tell you that the latest data from the National Pension Commission reveals that Nigeria's pension fund asset dropped marginally to 19.6 trillion naira in the first quarter of the year. This represents a marginal decrease of about 0.45% when compared with 19.75 trillion naira in February 2024. This was contained in the Commission's monthly report for March 2024. A closer look at the data reveals that investment in FGN securities continues to dominate portfolio allocation with about 12.2 trillion naira, representing 62.03% of total net asset. Pension funds also allocated 2.05 trillion naira to corporate debt securities and 1.7 trillion naira to money market instruments. Data shows investment in ordinary shares of local companies rose by 8.72% to 2.08 trillion naira from 1.91 trillion naira in February. And that's our show this week. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your weekend with us. I'm Frank Omalape.